Yeah. This is live streaming on YouTube as well. So. You look like the CEO of something. I don't know what, but something. So do you. It's definitely the sports jacket slash, yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. Come on in. Plenty of seats. All right. We'll just wait for a few more to come in. Fantastic. All right. Before we begin, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. We are here at Stone and Chalk. Hands up if it's your first time at Stone and Chalk. Welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. This is an amazing place. We'll hear more about that soon. Chris, I hope your hand wasn't up. I didn't count, but yeah, you definitely shouldn't put your hand up, and you'll see why soon. But we do events here every month. This is a one-off special event that we just couldn't say no to when it was offered to us to do. We've got some amazing international guests here. When we did the homework to look into the things that they're talking about, what's really exciting is it converges a few topics that are very close to us. So in my day job, I work for a firm called NotCentralised, which is a venture studio doing stuff in blockchain and doing stuff in the AI space. We've got separate companies that do stuff there, which is really interesting. You'll hear about that towards the end. But we also run this Australian DeFi Association, DeFi for decentralized finance. And that power of open source, that power of decentralized technology, and we're going to learn more about that and how this sort of thing, collaborative technology, applies to democracy. Very important types of things there. Governance. It's not just voting once every few years and seeing it in the news, as it seems to be always in the cycle at the moment. There's far more to it in terms of human collaboration. So we're really proud to be bringing an event like this to you today, which is also being filmed. You'll notice that I haven't joked too much in my opening 30 seconds like I normally do. I'll bring the jokes a little bit later. But before we begin, because we are in this amazing innovation hub, I'd like to bring Chris Kirk, the CEO, up on stage to say a few words.
Thanks, Mark, and welcome everyone. It's fantastic to have so many new faces in the room. For those of you that might be aware, Stone and Chalk, non-for-profit, started back 10 years ago with a really incredible mission to help realise the opportunity for Australia to transition to a sustainable tech-driven economy. Now, what on earth does that actually mean? Well, it means we back entrepreneurs seeking to solve some of the world's hardest and most pressing challenges. And I don't know about you, but I couldn't think about an area that is more pressing right now than the conversation we're going to have with these two lovely gentlemen, and just getting a little bit of insight from Audrey earlier around some of the unique challenges that have been faced out of in your former role. I'm very interested for this conversation. If there's one thing we've had the privilege to do over the years at Stone and Chalk, it's to see so many different sectors of the Australian economy grow, thrive, morph, find their place. And I think one thing that has always stood the test of time has been the brand of Australia as it relates to regulation, the rule of law and democracy. And if I reflect back on certainly some of the early success in Australia, really, quite frankly, batting above its weight when it came to fintech, a lot of that was actually down to the fundamental pillars, some of which, you know, many of us as Australians take for granted each day. So I'm really excited by the growth of this community and a little relieved, because there's only so many years that you can run, cryptocurrency and other events before you go, where are the real applications that are going to have an impact in the world here? This is a conversation that is exciting. Stone and Chalk would love to continue to support this community. I think absolute credit to the Aus DeFi Association and the team for making tonight happen. And please, if you're in the community and you've got ideas around ways that organisations like Stone and Chalk can support you on your journey, please do reach out. So without further ado, I'll pass back to Mark and the team. Enjoyed tonight. Hope it's thought-provoking, and encourage you, if you haven't, jump into Stone and Chalk's website, sign up for events. You know, we do 400 plus a year, and there's some really thought-provoking content out there as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chris. And this really is an event hub. Australia has a lot of talents. You know, you've seen how great we are at breakdancing, but today you're going to see how great we are at our events as well. Although, having said that, Alex up the back is an amazing breakdancer. So, honest to God. I'm going to bring up my colleague Arturo to introduce both Glen and Audrey. But if Glen and Audrey, if you can come up on stage and sit with Arturo, there's some mics there. Thank you so much. So Arturo will introduce the work that Audrey has done and her former role as Digital Minister of Taiwan and many more things. We'll talk about plurality and Glen's work as well. So I will leave you guys to it. I'm going to be right up the back if you need me. See you guys soon.
I think that you already introduced them without. So we have, this is one of our most exciting events, I think, because you know how we've always spoken about not having an association where it's focused on number go up, although that's also quite fun. But for me personally, this topic is I think the catalyst for me to kind of go into the rabbit hole, as I think most of you have done if you've been in the Web3 space. And that rabbit hole effectively is related to human interaction, collaboration, competition, all these topics that are really, really fascinating. So, Glen, how about we talk about what is plurality?
So, plurality is technology for collaboration across social difference. So the way I think about it is, if you ask what was industrial technology about, it was about taking. Hello? Ooh, there we go. It's technology for collaboration across social difference. What was industrial technology? It was really taking low entropy, not mixed physical states in fossil fuels and converting them into work. That's really industrial technology. What was nuclear technology? It was taking unmixed, differentiated atomic states and converting them into energy. And what is digital technology about? Well, the thesis of plurality is it's about taking cultural diversity, unmixed social states, and turning them into useful social work. So that's my simple version of plurality.
Audrey, how about your words?
Yeah, in Taiwan, 10 years ago, the trust level between the people and the administration at the time was at 9%. And so like very low trust. And there's a lot of polarization, like the likes you've probably never seen, that we occupied the parliament for 3 weeks over a trade deal, non-violently. But obviously, there's a lot of social polarization, a lot of social differences and so on. So a lot of fuel in the same kind that Glen alluded to. But unlike other Occupy movements where it kind of explodes or dissipates or goes nowhere and so on, we figured out a way using a lot of the social technologists' way of, for example, open space technology, dynamic facilitation, nonviolent communication, and so on and so forth, coupled with live streaming and online summarization and all of these digital technologies, we successfully worked with 500,000 people on the street and many more online, and every day just did checkpoints of rough consensus, like things that people can broadly agree on, like uncommon common grounds that was discovered during the day, so that every other day, then we inch together a little bit over one aspect of the trade deal with Beijing. So we always said that we're not protesters were demonstrators, because protester is just against something, it is explosion, but demonstrators make demos, right? So it demonstrates a better way to cohere those differences into something like a shared agenda. And at the end of 3 weeks, the Speaker of the Parliament, Wang Jinping, simply said, these are good ideas, and people have converged. That's our national direction. You can go home now, right? So this is one of the very few Occupy that actually ended up cohering. And so this way of thinking, of bridging across those differences, of working with the 20 or more civil society organizations to get sort of a rough consensus. It philosophically has a lot similarities to how distributed ledgers and self-organized organizations online are organized. And so instead of saying that digital technology is a separate thing just for broadcasting and things like that, we aim to shape the technologies to do like broad listening and bringing people together. And so we started a decade of experiments in Taiwan deploying such technologies, and we successfully use that technology to ensure the reciprocity of trust, so that at the height of the pandemic, for example, the trust level in Taiwan is easily over 70%, and even today is around 60%. So like a lot more than the 9% that we started with. So the book chronicles this, distills it in some design principles, and we would like to steer like both blockchain and AI technologies toward this direction, rather than this very top-down authoritarian or too individualistic directions.
So that was quite a lot. So just to give you guys a bit of a feel of the depth here. Now that we have that, let's understand who we're actually talking to here. Glen, what's your background? How did you get into this?
I'm a recovering economist, a recovering socialist, a recovering leader of the National Teenage Republican Organization in the United States. So I'm recovering from many things. And I work at Microsoft when I'm not on sabbatical like I am right now. And I've written a couple of books. One that was picked up by Vitalik Buterin and brought me into the Web3 space. I tend to be a sidekick to luminaries like Vitalik and Jaron Lanier and Audrey. I like to sort of be an intellectual supporter and cheerleader and bolsterer rather than trying to be my own thing. So
amazing. Audrey, how about you?
Well, I served as Taiwan's digital minister for 7.5 years. Before that, I served in the National Curriculum Committee and also as a young reverse mentor, people who are younger than 35 who advise the cabinet. So I've been in the public sector for like 10 years. But before that, I worked with Apple on Siri technology for 6 years, worked with social text on decentralized, well, not really decentralized, polycentered, conversational software, wiki software, and things like that deploys in their enterprise. And then before that was one of the earlier like dot-com boom style entrepreneurs. When I was 15, dropped out of junior high to start one of the first eBay-like C2C auction site in Taiwan and so on. So I've been also in that world. But I think the common thread here is that the more that we are humble, the more we take not like a solutionist approach, but rather give the toolkits to the people that we serve, the more actually we see lasting impact.
So I think that one of the most interesting comments I've heard in a long time that I'd like to unpack a little bit here is the view of democracy as a social technology. We talk a lot about democracy, but I don't think that we all have a proper definition of what it is and therefore how and why it is important. So how about we start off there?
I think that democracy is that the things that interconnect us, we govern them if we're interconnected by them. And the thing is that's constantly changing.
So for democracy to survive, to stay alive, it has to constantly shift, has to have new types of government, new types of democracy governing the new things that are interconnecting us.
So, like if it's a river, then whatever boundaries that it spans, it is an ecosystem around the river. If it is like the internet or any public good, then there is this entire stakeholder ecosystem around that. So anything that is a common good of a kind of common good nature, we need a corresponding way to govern it. Otherwise, if we take the divide and conquer methods, then we overfocus on the specifics and forget about so-called supermodular, that is to say the sum is more than its parts nature of things, and then we do not get to this like common good, and we get stuck into negative or zero-sum game.
Yeah, that's amazing. So if we think about functioning models that could be described as democratic, that have had really good outcomes within the open source space, could you think of a few?
I mean, the internet itself, right? Linux, Wikipedia, these are still around. But more recently, I would say this focus on digital public infrastructures in many places, including Estonia and India, but I'm more familiar with Taiwan. This is also something that's been really promising. The idea is that if people see that interoperable digital identity in terms of like zero knowledge proofs, verifiable credentials, or things like that, the interoperability itself is a common good, then the state goes in, but instead of doing any top-down design, like authentication must flow through the state just supports the civic infrastructure and promote it as digital public infrastructure. Like in Taiwan, we use the transportation committee's public infrastructure budget for this kind of DID wallet and things like that. And so it's not just Taiwan. We have seen in Buenos Aires, in many places, and recently I read also Australia is trying a pilot of this sort of thing. And so interoperability as a common good that is worth the public sector supporting the civic governance of such infrastructures, I think that is a recent story that is very much worth sharing.
Glenn, how about examples of this working historically in a more, let's call it human, or no, in a more political context? Because I'm trying to match here the way in which things have worked in technology space versus how they have worked in non-technology space, and kind of see the similarities between them.
I'll give an example of NATO. So, there's a very capitalist mode of international cooperation where we tear down trade barriers, we tear down subsidies, we tear down government support of industry. But an alternative is NATO. NATO requires all of its members to make investments in common defense. It requires that those investments be interoperable with each other. And so it actually lifts up investment and then coordinates that across countries. So it's a very different mode of international interaction. And I think maybe a model for people throughout the free parts of Asia to think about how they can cooperate.
That's I think that the beautiful part of this conversation is to see that there's work that can be done in the comfort of your own home, connected to an internet, and connecting to people, and effectively testing out all of these different kind of modes of collaboration that also apply in the much bigger scale when you look at nation states or much bigger groups, and the patterns kind of apply, which is quite fascinating, right? Now, if I slightly kind of change the topic towards the educational side, right? You did some great work in terms of changing the way in which the curriculum worked in Taiwan. Can you elaborate a little bit there?
So around 2018, when we hit like peak polarization in Taiwan and populism and all things like that, we switched our national curriculum from media literacy or digital literacy, from the word literacy, into competence. So starting in 2019, in all the levels of Taiwanese basic education, the students are no longer, required to do this standardized, literacy, which is very individual, like competitiveness and standardized answers and all sort of just receiving information, but rather it is around the idea of co-production. So instead of consuming the news, the students are asked to participate in the fact-checking, in the collaborative building of context, like when the presidential debates are happening, if they can, spot the typos or problems, statements, and so on, they can add to this collaborative fact-checking database that then pushes to even end-to-end encrypted channels and so on. So play a kind of antibody, right, a defense against polarization attacks. And they measure the air qualities and then water qualities and upload them into a distributed ledger to ensure that there can be like civic oversight on environmental issues. And there's also citizens initiatives, many of them started by 14 years old, 15 years old, around environmental policy or around school policy or whatever. But the whole point is that to make sure that they can set the conversation of national agenda before they turn 18, so that they feel that they're now part of the democratic citizenry before they turn 18. And then they influence their parents and then their grandparents to kind of inoculate themselves against polarization, because it is not the checked facts that inoculates people. It's that act of going through the different sources, of building the context together, of connecting back to community, and then contribute to the competence that really inoculates people against polarization attacks. And this is also how we successfully overcame the height of the infodemic during the COVID without any censorship or takedown or things like that. After the pandemic, not only did we overcome it with flying colors, but also Taiwan became the most free place in all of Asia when it comes to internet freedom, and one of the first democracies as well, as opposed to democracy backsliding because of the threat of disinformation.
So if we tie all of these things together and kind of try to answer the question that's actually on the slide there, Glenn, what would you say? What are the key benefits, challenges of decentralizing political and economic power?
Well, there's a defensive benefit, but then I think that there's a much more creative benefit. The defensive benefit is it makes the system much more robust, makes it much less fragile. That was the original idea of the internet. But in the end, the main point of the internet was not actually its resilience against social media attack. That was a justification. What ended up becoming important about it was how generative it was, how it brought people together from many different places and therefore allowed all kinds of creativity by recombining different social spheres that hadn't existed before. So the real benefit of decentralization, I don't think, is resilience against attack, even though that's an easier thing to model. The thing that's really beneficial about it is that it harnesses the intelligence that exists in social diversity and channels it towards, progress and growth and innovation. But the biggest challenge is that it's always harder to work with people who are different from you. And it's always therefore tempting to interact with them in the thinnest way using, capitalism and money and things like this. But that's actually not the most creative or productive way to interact with people. Plurality is about allowing us to collaborate across that breadth of diversity while deepening the types of connections that we can have, allowing us to have meaningful, productive conversations rather than flame wars, allowing us to have empathetic connections rather than just commercial connections.
I think we should go over to the next slide. So I think you have a few things to say about quadratic voting. I mean, you've been involved in that, right? Kind of, yeah. So where did that thought process come from initially? What triggered it?
Well, I'm not sure that the context of discovery is really that related to the context of justification or explanation, but I was working on issues around what you would call compulsory acquisition and thinking about how communities could participate in a meaningful way in deciding whether a compulsory acquisition should occur or not, and how individual holdouts wouldn't work, but also consensus wouldn't work, and so what could you do? And that's where quadratic voting eventually came from. But I don't know that it has much to do with the best way to explain it.
It's always an interesting anecdote to understand, where it comes from, because it gives people an idea of how that innovation effectively happened, right? Now, where have you seen quadratic voting been implemented in the way? What has been the most exciting way of implementation of
I think Audrey can give like a real world example, and then I can give a otherworldly example, which is also really fun.
All right. So the real world example is since 2017, 18, right, when we first met online, we adopted quadratic voting to Taiwan's presidential hackathon. The Taiwanese design here is that every year there's 200 or so of projects that started pseudonymously by the people in the public sector that work with their civic tech or their impact entrepreneur friends that tries a very small proof of concept of a new way of applying like data or digital or things like that works on a small way, like in a district, in a remote island, or in a small scale, basically. Because many of those ideas for it to really work, like for example, if you want telemedicine to really work, there's a lot of regulatory changes that need to happen. There's a lot of broadband as human right deployment that needs to happen. So usually the impact investors don't get sufficient money really, unless there is a governmental promise that whatever they require will become public infrastructure that's supported indefinitely, right, by the government. And so this is a basically public goods funding problem. And so we solved that by asking the 200 or so project ideas to go to a quadratic vote. And so if you're a Taiwanese resident or citizen, you get 99 points, and then you get probably an invitation from your friends to vote for their project. But once you get into the voting website, you will find very quickly that with 99 points, if you vote one vote, that's costing you 1 point. But 2 votes cost you 4, and 3 votes cost you 9. It's quadratic. So with 99 points, you can only vote 9 votes for your friend's project, which costs 81 points, and you have 18 left. Nobody wants to squander those. So people then look at some other projects and discover maybe this one that shares some synergy, and then vote maybe 4, and that's 16 points, and there's still 2 points left. So people are motivated to look at least 4 projects, at which point they probably take some of their original 9 back because it's cost too much. Maybe they do a 7 and 7, maybe they do something like that. But the great thing of this is that then it allows us, when we choose the top 20, to proceed to the next round of 6 months of co-creation. It's like a group selfie that shows how much synergy does those 200 projects have in common, and how we can then reshuffle the ones that did not make the cut to the top 20 into the top 20 to recombine them for the maximum public good. And then 5 teams every year, when they proved their social return on investment and so on, receive a trophy from our president, which is a projector that when turned on projects the image of the president giving you that trophy. So it's very meta, it describes itself. And with it, the presidential promise that whatever you did on a local scale will become public infrastructure on the next fiscal year. And so it kind of jump frogs the initial angel round of things, right? Then you know that the infrastructure round will be maintained by the government indefinitely. And then you get to focus on the application and in a way that's interoperable. And so this is like the presidential agenda setting power as a hackathon prize. And we've been running it for many, many years now, for like 6 years now, 7 years now. And it consistently produces a kind of very forward-looking horizon scanning infrastructure map for the Taiwanese digital public infrastructure. So without quadratic voting, we would not have this kind of radar, a group selfie of what really is the most synergistic among those common good projects.
You want my ethereal
Yeah,
example?
from the beyond, the great beyond.
Yeah. So there's a game called Civilization 6. It's the best-selling strategy game of all time. And in that game, in the latest expansion pack, there's a diplomatic voting to set global policies that uses quadratic voting to decide on the global policies, who wins various prizes, etc. So I think that's another nice example, extremely different, of where it's just fun as a way to interact and kind of make sense as a game mechanic.
That's really, really cool. Next slide, please.
I'm the next slide.
You're the next slide. Oh, there you go.
Hey, there you go. That's not my face. Civilization 6 gaming. Who has played Civilization? Who has played Civilization 1? Yeah, okay, I'm going to keep my hand up. Thank you for showing my age.
Who's played Magic the Gathering? So that the guy who designed that actually lives in Sydney and is working right now on producing a game based on some of these ideas. So
There you go.
Richard Garfield.
Okay, there you go. We'll put his details in the show notes. You mentioned the hologram thing there. We've got the opposite of Aus DeFi. We're working on something where when you play it, it's Arturo taking an award away from you. So it's a reverse kind of one there. But the gentleman that is up on screen here is Paul Fletcher. You may meet him in your travels during the rest of the time you're here in Australia. Paul is in the opposition. They were in government before. Who knows what happens in 2025 if the election is then. But he's the digital minister, and he has been very interested in work being done in both blockchain and AI. We worked on the CBDC pilot along with banks and others to test what could happen. And he was very interested in that. And he's been very interested in the AI space as well. So hopefully there'll be some good conversations there. But Paul asks, Audrey, what did you prefer, working in the tech sector or being a politician?
Oh yeah, I enjoy working in the Lagrange point. The idea is that between two astral bodies with gravitational pulse, instead of orbiting one, the tech sector, or the other, the politics, the government, I constantly stay in the middle, feeling the same gravity from both sides, and then therefore relay better the languages, the communication protocols from one side to another. And this is a place that I held for a very long time. For 10 years, I publicly say, I'm not any party supporter. I never attended any rallies in any particular political parties. I just constantly make sure that when there's emerging technologies coming, they can be translated into the Taiwanese norm so that we can steer the technology together. And also when there is a way for the common political will to say that technology need to be steered into a particular section, we can also ask our technologists to anticipate this need, for example, during the pandemic, not making sacrifice between privacy and public health, and then develop in that way. So it's bi-directional pipe, right, that is mounted on previously the Lagrange 1 point where there's a lot of stress, but I've graduated and moved more maybe to the L2 or L3.
I guess the key was to make it a two-body problem and not a three.
Nice reference. Glenn, you mentioned before intellectual supporter. Really like that term. Do you feel more akin to that, or which one are you pulled by more? I know I'm not sure if you have gotten into politics, but do you prefer politics more or tech, I guess?
I guess working with Audrey is a little bit more like politics. And I guess my day job at Microsoft is a little bit more like tech. I mean, I think I'm very much like Audrey, except maybe I'm a little bit more of a dynamic rather than the static Lagrange point. I like to kind of orbit, circle in, use the gravity to come back to the other one.
Slingshot.
Slingshot, exactly. Like do a figure eight around them or something like that. Because I unlike Audrey, who never attended a rally, I attended in January when I went to Taiwan's elections, both rallies. And I was never a Republican nor a Democrat. I was actually very loud, very partisan, both in rapid succession. And I'm learning from Audrey how to be both at the same time as well, like water. Yeah, I think every sector of society is dysfunctional, and what's great is that they're dysfunctional in different ways, and that means that if you stitch them together, maybe you can make something beautiful.
You mentioned be both. Could you choose to be none?
I prefer to be both than to be none. I don't think, I guess it was Archimedes said, give me a lever and a place to stand and I'll move the world. I don't think you can take action from nowhere, but I think you can take action from anywhere, but only if you take it in relationship to the other side. And so I don't believe in just floating above, being detached. I believe in being connected to both.
I'll leave you to the next question. Chris?
It was a really, really nice answer, Glenn. So, any takers? Who wants to go?
I'll go for it. So
Yeah.
I would say, I think I like the phrasing in terms of social inequality rather than economic inequality, which is how we usually talk about it. Because I don't think we can address the problems of social inequality unless we have systems that measure social inequality. And I don't think most of our systems do, because social inequality is about connections. It's about the social relationship that people have to each other. It's not about some one-dimensional material thing. And it's related to different spheres in which people operate. Because the social is complex. It's not just about numbers. It's about networks and relationships. And so systems that can perceive social differences, that can map out those relationships and then can give bridging bonuses for the connections drawn between people who are socially separated. That's really what's exciting to me, not ones that try to talk about equality, because the opposite in that world of social equality is not inequality, is not social equality. Actually, social equality is the enemy of solving social inequality, actually, because equality wants to collapse everything to simplicity, whereas combating social inequality is actually about building more complexity.
Have you seen any practical ways of measuring social interactions that are not economic?
So Glenn mentioned the bridging bonuses. It came out from research into bridging systems, which you can read all about in bridging.systems. It's an actual domain name. But the idea is something we tried in Taiwan almost 10 years ago using the polis system. The idea, very simply put, is that for any public conversation, you can design a pro-social kind of a social media where we ask people very simple questions like, how do you feel about the Uber X situation, basically? And people share their feelings. And for each feeling that they share, there can be an upvote or a downvote, but there's no reply button, so there's no way for trolls to grow. And we couple it again with a group selfie, with a clustering visualization of showing the people what the clusters are. And we measure the plurality, the diversity of each group, not the head count. So if 5,000 people feel exactly the same, they're just one dot in that dimension reduction space. So you can imagine like taxi drivers, Uber drivers, Uber passengers, or people who care about rural service and things like that. It doesn't matter how many people are in each cluster, just that there are a variety of clusters that don't agree on each other's sentiments, that don't resonate. And then we surface out the social connectors, the people who propose very nuanced ideas, nuanced feelings. For example, I don't know, surge pricing is fine when the demand is high, but undercutting existing meters is not fine, or something like that. Slightly more nuanced bridges. And then people who were different broadly agreed on that statement. So that statement brought those diversity a little bit closer. So we give a bridging bonus saying that, oh, this is a higher score. They flow to the top, and then we let the top ones determine the national agenda talking about ride sharing. And so we've used that for many, many things after the initial Uber conversation. But the Uber conversation went like popular enough in the social sciences circle so that community nodes who explicitly took the algorithm into the the open source implementation that's used by X.com and nowadays also used by YouTube, work on the same principles. Basically, if you are part of the X.com or YouTube ecosystem and you can see a video or a post that is lacking context, anybody can then attach a note, a mandatory note to it that cannot be taken away to balance the context. But how to determine which context notes flow to the top? Well, it is the one that is agreed by people who normally don't agree on anything, right? So the more distance they cross, the more bonus they get from this bridging. And that is a very good measure on constructiveness, on curiosity, on this pro-social sentiments and so on, so that people also conjecture and some experiments that if we sort the For You feed on the social media feed using these algorithms, then actually people then have much better social connections. And this kind of social media doesn't decrease engagement, but it does increase quality of life and mental health and so on. And so there's a lot to be said about such bridging systems, but it is one way to just make polarization something that is actually healable, that you can recover from polarization by first revealing polarization and then honoring and upranking the statement that crosses those polarized factions.
It's fantastic. I saw another slide about transparency, I think, the next one. There we go. I'd like to switch that question over slightly. Transparency versus selective disclosure that is fully auditable, right? i.e. ZKs on blockchain versus just full ERC20s. And what would you say about the importance of either or in a social/political context?
Well, so I think the simple version I would give is that I think we really misunderstand both the terms privacy and transparency / publicity. That's the usual binary that we set up, but let me give a very different binary that is completely orthogonal and kind of along the median line of those. So you have the secret plan of like a football club that they're going to run against the other team, very closely understood by the members, but completely obscure to everyone outside. Versus something that Audrey is really an expert at. Sometimes I call her Shengren, which means sage in Chinese for this reason. But she leaves like Where's Waldo style things floating around. She's totally transparent, and yet actually people understand very, very little of what she says because she's constantly hiding little mysteries around. So those are two very different informational patterns, right? And I think that both have their merits, but we have to think about that kind of thing in terms of the social structure of information. Much more than we should think about either publicity or transparency. And I think in many cases, that idea of maintaining very clearly understood but tightly controlled information is actually the most valuable. That's what I call plural publics, that there be a diversity of different groups that internally have very clear common understanding, but that's obscured from people outside the group.
Audrey, you've used the term radical transparency. How does that fit into this context?
Yeah, so I use that in a very technical way, like during my service in the cabinet, all the lobbyist visits, all the journalist visits, and even some of the internal meetings that I chair, you can find it on the sayit.archive.tw website, and there's more than 2,000 of those meetings. And so The idea, very simply put, is that when lobbyists and these people visit me, they already know that they're on the record, but it's not live streamed. So they have like 10 working days to take out any trade secret or whatever they feel like taking out, but they cannot change what the words I said, right? So there was, like, in the extreme cases, a conversation with Microsoft senior leadership team where every word from their side was redacted, but you can still kind of suss out the context based on my side of conversations. That's an extreme version. But the thing, though, is that the lobbyists really, and the private sector visitors and so on, really all ask and talk about sustainability, the common good, future generations, and the good of the earth and so on in this context, because they know that the future is watching, so to speak. And so it forces the conversation into the common good category instead of something that's maybe good short term for both of us, but very bad for everybody else, right? So I think that is the way that I've used when there's a very low trust, again, 9% from the citizens to the government, to regain that trust by radically trusting people with not just the what of policies made, but the how and why of policy making. People can then understand, like, the context in which that we make such decisions. And it does pay a lot of dividends. For example, all the pre-trained models, whether it's Gemini or GPT or Claude or Llama, now do a very good approximation of Audrey Tang. If you asked it to say what Audrey Tang would say in any situation, because there's, you know, thousands and thousands of pre-trained materials in Creative Commons Zero, you know, they all know me very well. So I think that is a good thing, in a sense, that it instills a predictableness of how the balance between the various stakeholders is done. And this is also how kind of I design myself out, so that instead of each case requiring me to personally chair it, people can very easily see how this kind of balancing act, this open multi-stakeholder sense-making works. And then people can just, through that transcript alone, to then connect to those nonviolent communicators, facilitators, and things like that, and do more participatory policymaking.
It's fantastic. Do we have another slide?
I think almost by definition, the answer is central, because literally that's the definition of plurality. But it's also in the way we made the book, what we instantiated. The book was written not just by the two of us, but by about 6 other people around the world. And all of you are welcome to become co-authors of the book if you wish.
Yeah,
We'll
it's free of
probably-
copyright, so we can fork a few chapters out and call it your book.
Or you can edit the root repository, and we'll put out a new edition probably in the next month or so.
Yeah. Okay. Richard Stallman is working on a few paragraphs about free software.
Oh, is he?
Yeah,
Great,
so
excellent.
hopefully he will make it to the cut.
So we had a bit of a conversation before about collaboration and competition. I'd love if you could share your views with the rest of the community, because they were quite informative to me. I mean, as we were saying before, usually we see a collaboration versus competition, but you have a different way of seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, they interleave with each other. I'll give the example of sports and the biological example. So in sports, you compete to be on a team, to collaborate on the team, to compete against another team, to collaborate to bring attention to that sport, to compete against other sports, to collaborate to bring fame to the country, to compete against other countries, to collaborate on global sports versus war. And in biology, parts within a cell compete with other parts within the cell to collaborate in the cell, to compete against other cells, to collaborate within the organ, to collaborate with other organs, to compete against another organism, to collaborate in a civilization, to compete against other civilizations, etc. So competition and collaboration are constantly interleaving with one another. That's just how the world works. The problem is that we don't conceptualize things that way because it's complex, and it's much easier to be simplistic and be like, I favor capitalism, or I favor communism, or some simplistic thing like this. But the reality is that's just not how the world works. It's not how any complex system works. That both of those positions are just anti-life, because that's not how life is.
I think that my takeaway there. Do we have another slide, by the way? Video. Okay, so before we jump onto that video, I think that the biggest takeaway I personally have here is how fascinating it is that we have a very, on the one hand, a very technology-centric conversation, but on the other hand, it's permeated almost entirely by empathy, right? That the goal to be able to achieve these things is to have empathy across the board, because otherwise the collaborative aspect of what we're trying to achieve just doesn't work, right? And to that end, on the point of competition, which might seem in a very simplistic way anti-empathetic, because you're trying to win, to beat somebody else. You do see competition as a really good tool. I mean, you have genetic algorithms that are competing ideas to find the best idea. That doesn't mean that you need to compete against a person, right? You can collaborate together to find the right solution, and part of that collaboration is to have a competitive model. But the collaboration aspect is that you share on the benefit of the outcome, and I don't think that we see enough of that. 2 cents anyway. So we're now going to share a beautiful video in relation to the great work that these guys are doing.
Across the world, democracy is on a decline.
Authoritarianism is on the rise.
Global freedom has eroded for the 18th consecutive year.
Audrey, Tang, what is your greatest hope for democracy across the globe?
That people see democracy as a social technology, something that people can construct together, that they can improve in the here and now. We can code up political systems.
The Sunflower Movement was a real turning point for Taiwan's democracy.
When the Sunflower Movement happened, I said to my colleague, I have to leave now. Democracy needs me. I brought a very long cable for internet connection. I live streamed through Twitter. Everybody saw it is possible for democracy to evolve, to come up with novel policies simply by asking the people, what should we do together? I was born with a heart defect, and one day I just fainted. I woke up in a hospital, and they told me the hole in my heart has grown. I could die. This awareness that everything can be reset tomorrow reminds me of Taiwanese democracy. We can't lose our democracy just with a couple missiles.
I think there's a lot that the world can learn from Taiwan. The US is running on a 250-year-old operating system. There is a strong desire to move beyond this and properly rethink from first principles. What would democracy in the 21st century actually look like?
We can make the government more open to the public. It'll be easier for people to access the data, to analyze it, transparency.
Audrey has created the opportunity to make Taiwan the most exciting constitutional democracy in the world.
I think it's a very critical moment. China really wants to invade Taiwan.
You're sitting on a place that is the flashpoint if there's going to be World War III. And yet there's calm in the eye of the hurricane. And that calm, I think, emanates from all that Audrey's done.
We can become co-creators of our democratic system, reconfiguring society in a way that is more transparent, more inclusive, more fair.
I think we have time for a few questions. Please, kick off. Any takers?
Don't go all at once. 1 second. You go, sir.
Thank you. Hi, guys. Where do you see the value of like expertise or subject matter experts in the kind of crowdsourced sort of dialogue that you promote, and what would be the relationship of expertise within that system?
That's a great question. So I'll use a recent example. We held a online citizens assembly, a deliberative polling called Alignment Assembly around the use of like deepfakes and so on, abuse really on social media and the limits, right? And so we sent SMS to 200,000 random numbers in Taiwan from the 111, the official number, so people know it's not a scam. And then we asked people whether they would like to spend a almost entire day for like $70 to have a conversation around this particular topic that will then form our Anti-Fraud Act and other related regulations. Now, out of the people who participated, who indicated their willingness to participate, we first use random stratified sampling, that is to say in terms of where they live, gender, occupation, and so on. They are a mini public of 500 people that represents the entirety of Taiwanese society in a way that's statistically the same, like a rigorous poll. But then of the 450 people that actually turned up, 150 are like media practitioners, people who do this for a living, who have a professional experience and their livelihood or their working environment the most impacted by generative AI and deepfakes and so on. And so what we did is that we put them into rooms of 10 so that the experts are basically mixed, or the practitioners are mixed in such a way that they need to share their working experiences, and they are treated as experts. There's also rooms of just 10 experts each, but they have to convey their lived experience in such a way that makes sense for the other 9 people in the same room. And so like every expert is an expert in their own domain, but perhaps not in the domain of explaining things or of applying things across their domains to other practitioners. And I mean, media is also a very large like umbrella term, so there's like many subdomains within it. And so what we have discovered is that people do yield to like more time for the experts to explain their lived experiences of facing such information integrity harms. But then because it's not facilitated by human this time, the room itself facilitates, so that if people just keep quiet, the room actually reminds them to speak up more and so on. So it tends to be like the experts share their experience first, but because of the room of structured, then people ask questions, or people add their own ideas, their own interpretations and so on. And the great thing about this generation of language model technology is that as the 45 rooms are concurrently going on, you can take actually a group selfie across all 45 groups, which is something human facilitators really struggle to do. Like if you have 45 facilitators, they can't really, huddle in real time. But using language models, we can, so that we can pick up fragments from one room and the other room and the other room, and then combine them into something that makes sense to the both experts, and also translate it kind of culturally into layperson's speech, so that people can say, for example, that deepfakes can be stopped partly by making sure that if somebody posts an advertisement on a large social media platform, that's advertisement, if there's a celebrity or somebody in it, need to provide a public signature. And if they do not have the signature secured and somebody get conned for $1 million, then the social media company need to be liable for that $1 million. And so it is a very nuanced statement that combines like 3 different suggestions from 3 different rooms. But when it's read out back to the plenary, people thought, yeah, it makes sense, right? It's like compression without the lossiness of human compression or headline compression, and then they go back into the 10 groups again, 10 people groups again. And so now what we have crowdsourced at that time becomes law already. It's passed by the Taiwanese parliament. It only took like 3 months between the initial alignment assembly and the law passed. And I would say like intermixing the 150 professional practitioners into the conversation is absolutely necessary, but so also is the necessary component of translation across their language and the everyday people's language, which occurs partly just because they need to talk with 9 other people, but also partly because the deployment of talk to the city and other kind of deliberative polling and the other kind of language model application that enable this kind of translation that humans can also do, but the machines can do so in real time and in scale.
I think another way to concisely put it is, rather than thinking about there being expertise versus the people, instead think of there being, we're into more expertise. We don't just want one kind of expertise. We want expertise in accessibility. We want expertise in legal. We want expertise in the economy. We want expertise. Everyone has an expertise. There's no common man. There's just diversity of experts. And so we want more expertise in our systems, not less.
But we also want to make sure that the experts can speak in their professional language, but be understood by everyday people. And there's a lot to be said about the translational facilities that enable this in real time.
Awesome. Thanks very much for the talk, everyone. So obviously growing up in a Western democracy, we have a lot of strong intuitions around democracy and decentralization and things like that as sort of natural goods. One thing we do found, particularly being in the Web3 space for enough time, you'll see things that are more modeled on more authoritarian constructs. So like traditional centralized companies outcompeting decentralized organizations, or other scenarios where we see more authoritarian things winning over democratic things. Glenn, you talked earlier in the presentation about some of the, it's not just about democracy being this immune system against tyranny, but there are also native benefits. And my overall question is what gives democracies the right to win against authoritarian systems? What are the strengths and what do we need to do to make sure that happens?
I think there's big D democracy, like state level or things like that. But there's also small d democracy in that just using quadratic voting among a group of people to choose a better, soccer coach or something like people did in Brazil. So it could be practiced in any level. And I think it is the lower levels that the smaller levels at the co-op level, the community level, the intentional community that lives together level, and all these levels where small d democracy really shines, because then it can be adopted and adapted in a way that these organisms or these ways of life can maximize the bandwidth, the bit rate, right, of democratic input, and also to reduce the latency. I think on the very large scale, like tens of millions of people scale, people tend to overly associate with this very low bandwidth, like literally just a few bits every 4 years, very high latency rituals, and then people think, of course, when the emerging threats come, when the emerging situation come, when the wicked problem, the meta crisis or whatever comes, this bandwidth is not enough to co-create, to solicit and elicit better co-creations, and that is true, but in order to overcome that, we need to upgrade democracy with the small d democracy experiments in a way that is high bandwidth and low latency, instead of saying that we just use the fossilized 250-year-old operating system. We need to upgrade the operating system with more APIs that enable this kind of ad hocracy, really, that integrates the civil society kind of or mutualist or co-op decision making into the decision making apparatus.
I also think that the vision of the corporation as dictatorship that is a huge part of the imaginary of certain people in the Web3 world bears almost no relationship to the way that anyone who's actually worked in those contexts understands them. And it's actually very interesting, because if you look at the people who most advocate that model, like Mencius Moldbug or Balaji Srinivasan, these are people who basically every attempt they've ever made to work in a complex organization has failed. They were very briefly in positions of power, and then they just exited and went to be speculators on shit, on exciting coins, and the reason is that's not actually how organizations work. Complex large corporations are actually doing really sophisticated forms of things that I actually think are more sophisticated than sortition. Like they hold these really interesting things called meetings. And during meetings, like you actually bring in stakeholders with a diversity of perspectives to try to come to like a joint course of action. And that's like really interesting. It's not actually like big man who thinks he's super cool, but like who no one actually has confidence in, tells everybody else the way things are. Like anyone who's ever worked in an organization like that knows it doesn't work out so well, right? And so, like, I think there's a line from Sun Yat-sen, one of the inspirations for our work, which says that, you know, wise action is often not easier than wise thought, because it's easier to like do things in a good way than it is to describe what it is that you're doing. And so I actually think that this imaginary of the corporation as a dictatorship is really destructive. It bears no relationship to the way that like well-functioning companies actually work.
Hello, thank you so much for coming. My name's Jackie Munro. I'm actually a politician in the New South Wales Parliament, and I was a little bit late because Parliament was still sitting, so sorry if you've already addressed this.
Thanks for being here, for making
pleasure.
it over here.
I just got appointed the Shadow Assistant Minister for Innovation and Digital Government, so there's a real recognition that this space is more and more important. And I wanted to ask...
Are you the first person in your party to serve in that role? Or,
yeah? No,
okay.
I'm not, but our party did create the role when we were in government, so... There was a lot of movement on data governance and ethics, also around AI. I was really curious about your journey, Audrey, from civil society into government and how you basically convinced your colleagues in the ministry that your work was valuable, and in a way you're kind of putting them out of a job as decision makers in a sense. And yeah, what that relationship was like, and any lessons that you can share for a poor New South Wales opposition member to learn.
I mean, AI to me is assistive intelligence. And so AI doesn't replace entire jobs. It just makes some tasks much more easy to deal with. So I think of my role, again, as an assistive one. I say I'm a public servant to the public service. And so it is not putting people out of the job. I often use design thinking, you know, the double diamond to explain, because in design thinking, there's this initial discovery phase where people just map out whatever people's wishes are. And then there's this define phase that gets people into the mood of like what the common problems are there things we can widely agree as the common ground, as kind of North Star and so on, values and so on. But it doesn't actually interfere with the development and the delivery, which is the second diamond. And so no ministers were ever put out of a job by the existing of the digital ministry. In fact, we formed the digital ministry after the pandemic when we looked at the teams that I most closely work with during the 2 or 3 years of pandemic, and then pulled like one team out of each of the 4 or so ministries into the digital ministry. And so they all still retain a lot of link back to their original ministries, whether it's economic or national like communication or the National Development Council or the cybersecurity apparatus and things like that. But the fact that they're now an integrated circuit means that we can then design this interoperability in a kind of full stack way, starting from, you know, satellite connectivity and cloud infrastructure, sovereign AI, all the way up to, you know, provenance, identity, you know, decentralized wallets or whatever interoperable software as a service ecosystem that serves the small and medium enterprises. All these are now within one interoperable stack. So the value we offer is a better way to discover the common needs, a better way to define the integrated stack. But we do not actually replace when it comes to the Ministry of Interior or Health or things like that, their functions. So it's a very old metaphor, but the metaphor we use because we're in the transportation committee and use public infrastructure budgets the same as airports and train stations. We always said we're building this information superhighway, but the fact that we maintain this superhighway doesn't mean that the function of the police on the highway, the function of ambulance cars on the highway, the things on the highway are suddenly our business. We provide a better way for these services to be delivered, but at the end of the day, the development and the delivery are still within the other ministries. So we're more of a hub than anything else.
Yeah, I think it's a very general feature of technology that the easiest, the laziest, and by far the least productivity enhancing way to use technology is to do at lower cost things that are already being done. Someone, and often it's also a harmful way to use them. So someone gave me today the example that there was a period in the early days of the motor vehicle when what people decided was that this was a good way to play polo. They would rip the doors off the car and they would hit basketballs or whatever around, and then they would crash into each other and get killed and whatever. And that did not work out so well for people. And it turns out that actually, if you take everything that the car could do better than the horse, that turned out to be 0.1% of what the car could do, and probably caused a lot of accidents in the process. And really, if we just completely forgot about all applications where it was doing what the horse was already doing faster, you probably would have gotten faster to the actual applications of the car. And I think that's very much true of these technologies. I think if we literally completely ban ourselves from ever discussing a case where we're doing faster or cheaper things that we're already doing, we might actually get the productivity gains from these technologies much faster than if we allow ourselves to talk about those applications.
Where? Oh. 1 second, I'm getting my steps up. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you for the speech. Quick 2-minute proposal. Sounded like you were training imitation agents on yourself. This is how you use that to save the world. Capabilities, exponentially increasing. Wisdom, definitely not, maybe even going down. You can't train on wisdom because it adversarially optimizes against you. You can try to understand it on a conceptual level, but we don't have 50 to 100 years. We go through multiple paradigms. So the only alternative here seems to be to train imitation agents of wise people and then to use them as advisors to then create a wisdom explosion as an alternative to an intelligence explosion. And you seem to be collecting a pretty good data set for that. So that is my proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Mark. I've got a question here as well. Actually, does anyone else have a question before I ask something?
One comment I'll give in response to that is, I found that wisdom hides in cracks, like water and air, and intelligence in the way that you do, it is like earth. It sticks out. In the Tao Te Ching, it says that we build the pot, but the space inside contains. And so I would say the problem is you need to teach the models to seek out the hidden. And I'll give an example. I told before that Audrey leaves lots of Easter eggs. I'll give you an example of an Easter egg of hers that I found. So in Chinese, the 2 characters of her name, Tong Fong, are pronounced in Japanese as Tong Otori. And that's where Audrey comes from. And Fong and Otori mean a bird that had a near-death experience and comes back stronger, like Audrey did with her heart. And they're also gender neutral, as Audrey in English was a male and female name. So all those steps of logic that come out of there, I have yet to meet anyone else who figured that all out. Took me a long time of just hanging around here and gathering things to figure that out. So wisdom is obscured. Wisdom hides in contradiction. It hides in paradox. And so if you go down the short route, the easy route, you won't find the wisdom. You have to draw that out. And if you want the models to be wise, it's not that wisdom doesn't exist. It's that wisdom is found in paradox. It's found hiding. It's found in puzzles. And you need to seek out those things to train on.
Would it be similar to say that genius is actually quite rare? The type of genius that changes generations, that has the tectonic shift, and you don't really know where it's coming from. So you kind of have to have access to almost entire cohort.
Or perhaps the right way to say it would be genius is abundant, but it's hidden. And it's much easier to go to the uncommon but apparent, and much harder to go to the hidden, the obscure, and when you see the person being the hero and the winner and the whatever, you maybe should immediately suspect that maybe that's not the real intelligence. Maybe the actual intelligence is what's not calling attention to itself, what's not demonstrated so clearly.
Any other questions, guys? Up, Hugh, right here.
Thanks, folks, for a tremendous presentation. I'll try and ask, I was very interested when you said democracy has to change. I'll try and put it as simply as possible. Do you see technology as enabling democracy or more fundamentally disrupting technology? I'm sorry, disrupting democracy.
I think if the technologists are humble and they work alongside people, with the people, not for the people, then it tends to be the kind of situational applications that if it doesn't work for democracy, there's a lot of democratized way to reconfigure it so that it serves democracy better. So we talk about open source, we talk about steerable, ethical, responsible AI or whatever, but to me, steerability is really the key. If it is steerable by the very people using the technology, then it almost never goes wrong. But on the other hand, if it is done in a way that the designers of technology live a very, very different experience, a very different social configuration than the people actually using it, then the harm may not be intentional, but it's always there. And then if it is done in a kind of dominating way, like asking the society to adapt to technology rather than the other way around, then it almost always hurts democracy. So I think it all begins with kind of the mind of the designer, whether you start in a place of humility, of saying that I cannot anticipate all the uses, so that, like our book, right? If you want to make a manga version, people are doing that in Japan. People in Scotland already made a novelization version of it and things like that. If we say, no, we don't really know your local context, and please help us adapt it so that it fits your local context better, then it's not a dominating view, and it never disrupts, in a disruptive innovation way. It always works in a kind of collaborative way. But on the other hand, if we, do a very prescriptive thing and then defend our thesis and things like that, then it may cause some harm if we try to just shoehorn every local context into particular theories of change.
Hey guys, thank you. So enlightening. I did not know Taiwan was so next level with how they do their voting and how they really engaged. But asking and thinking about how to turn a society around. A lot of times the revolution comes in with everyone feeling, okay, this is what we're going to do. And then when it actually gets played out, it ends up being something different than what it started as. Now, seeing you here now, it seems as if, how far away are you from who you started this movement as? Both of you. Like just tell me about that. Tell me what that is, because you can tell us anything. That sounds great. But you only know, were you more idealistic? Were you more, fight the power? Like, how did it change you?
Great question. Thank you. I would say first that you're welcome to come to Taiwan and experience the change yourself. We have a program called the Gold Card that anyone who contributes for 8 years to the commons, for example, Wikipedia or YouTube or even blogging or GitHub or whatever, Ethereum or any of those things online, gets the Gold Card that Glen is showing. So Glen is a Taiwanese resident with full universal health care and everything that comes with it. So like when people contribute, many people did like when they were 12 already have a, I don't know, Discord or GitHub or whatever, a Wikipedia account, OpenStreetMap. And if they contribute for 8 years and they turn 20, they're eligible for the Gold Card. And then they can become a Taiwanese resident. And we even sponsor your first trip to Taiwan. So it is one way to, it's like competition, right, for the global talent mindshare, but it is also cooperation because we're not asking you to denounce or to relinquish your passport. If you really like Taiwan, we give you dual citizenship. And so this is to your first part of your question. Now, to the second part. I think one of the things that I did not appreciate going into the government is how much innovation there is within the career public service. Again, seen from the outside, just like it's so easy to say, big tech is dictatorship of the CEO or something like that. It's very easy for us because the public servants are anonymous to kind of just say that they're there because they're bureaucrats. They're there because they're not innovative. If they want disruptive innovation, if they want excitement, they will have to work in the private sector or things like that, right? It's very easy for people on the outside to write off the career public service, the anonymous class. But after I actually served, I found that they're some of the most innovative people that I have worked with, and the most people who put most care to ensure that no one gets left behind, and also all that what we call now human-centered design or things like that. It just resonates with them like intuitively. Unlike when I was a agile coach or whatever in the private sector, we have to like train people into thinking that way. They kind of already think that way in terms of optimizing for the entire welfare of the people in the ecosystem instead of just one unit and things like that. So I think that really changed me in the sense that I no longer see myself as kind of introducing the latest and the greatest in crowdsourcing, in open government, in social innovation, in youth engagement from the private sector and civil society to the fossilized bureaucracy, but rather I see myself now as someone who uplifts and keeps the pseudonymity and do not add risk to the career public service, but to let their innovation have natural partnerships with the civil society and with the entrepreneurs, and then to basically make sure that they can innovate in a safe way so that if it doesn't work, they're just participating in a hackathon. But if it does work, then their idea becomes public infrastructure and their career gets redefined, right? So when I become the Minister of Digital Affairs, we even have an internal democracy system that says 30 people out of the 600 staff in a joint pseudonymous multi-signature can kind of just force me to answer to those ideas on my monthly live broadcast internally. If that idea gets 100 likes and more likes than unlikes, then I must commit myself to make it my ministerial agenda. So this is my kind of radical trust on the collective intelligence, which I do believe is the real genius. If you start with such a space where people can innovate without suffering the kind of repercussions for coming up with one bad idea early, then it fosters this co-creative culture that then uplifts the best from the team. And the career public service, very paradoxically, is one of the best places to try this internal democracies out. So I really become much more humble now compared to 10 years ago when I kind of went in and think that I'll just transform, right, the way things work.
I think my experience is related. If you'd met me a decade and a half ago, you would have seen me as a very brash, arrogant person who's like, I have the really innovative idea. And like, you know, I want to provoke people. I want people to get riled up. I want them to think I'm really, you know, big shot, different, whatever. And about 2 months ago, I was traveling with Shungren and we went to this dinner and I wasn't given very much context on it. But my friend had set it up and her intention had been that I was with a bunch of like, you know, degen, you know, style people. And my goal was to like persuade them to see the light and whatever. And as my previous self, I would have very much, even if I hadn't been given context, detected that and gotten into a defensive and persuasive mode. But I didn't even detect it because of the time I'd spent traveling with her. I just felt that these were people, you know, who I was sharing with and communing with and understanding with. And we all just were very relaxed. And I ended up talking not in like intellectual persuasive terms. I told stories from religions and from the life of Gandhi and whatever to make my points. And I just felt very kumbaya. And I think I was much more persuasive and effective in that mode at really doing innovation and change making than if I had been in my previous mode. And so that's an example of how I've changed as a result of this journey we've been on together.
Yeah, we got to get on the mic, otherwise it does not get heard. There is a live stream, folks.
Have any of you worked with the Caribbean, mainly Jamaica, any of the islands and such?
Not I.
No? All right. Well, that's coming up in your future because this is what I do. And
please.
Another thing that just goes to people who kind of are on the cutting edge. How easy is it to walk away from a conversation or a fight knowing that you're right just to get traction?
I don't fully understand the context. Do you mean like a online fight or a like literal?
Just in this, I mean, you guys are both in politics. You know, you come with ideas that say that I'm right. Like, I'm right. This is the right thing. I'm saying this for the people. But for you to get traction, for you to get movement, is it easy to walk away from the knowing that you're right? Like, how does that do for you?
For me, I mean, because I'm a public servant to the public service, my role is always not being right or left, but rather to figure out like how the bird's wings make the bird fly, so to speak. And I think this is very particular to my politics in that I never attended any party rallies. I never supported any like political ideologies or things like that. I'm a purely process person in a sense that if there's ever like disagreements, if there's any multi-stakeholder conflict and things like that, instead of putting down the fire, we set up the mechanisms so that the best ideas flow to the top without overly polarizing, and then we take the cream of the crop, the best ideas that are bridge making, and then making it into our national agenda. And so in this sense, none of these ideas are mine. Like none of the crowdsourced anti-fraud law or whatever are my idea, because we can track this to like individually crowdsourced or multi-stakeholder conversations. You can track it to the individual visits from the lobbyists and the media people or whatever to the specific lines in Say It where people say something good. And so it's more like stitching together those individual good ideas in contexts where they used to be against each other, but in a way that is actually co-creative. So turning conflict into co-creation is kind of a meta politic that I don't need to be right, and I'm actually never right. It is actually the collective intelligence, the crowd, the wisdom of the crowd, and so on, that provides what we call situational applications, things that respond to the challenges here and now. So it's, to your question, I think very easy for me to simply say, okay, let's rest for the day. This is good enough. We have something we can broadly, all live with. It is not perfect. And then whatever other conflicts there is, let's wait until tomorrow to deliberate, or the next chance to deliberate. To me, because I'm process oriented, this is not something that I can, just say this is the last round and let's not talk about this anymore and I will make the final decision. To me, there's always the next round and the next round. It's almost like an infinite game, so to speak.
Don't see any more questions. So personal takeaway. One more question. Hold on.
Yeah, thanks again. That's a fascinating process that you've described. And in following that process, have you ever encountered a situation where I guess the result that's risen to the top as a process, as a result of all that bridging, is something that you profoundly disagreed with?
No, I have not encountered anything that I personally disagree with. And I think that's because I pre-commit myself to honor as agenda whatever people come up with. But it's also important to say that none of this process is referendum-like, right? So it is not replacing the decision-making, the delivery stage. It is just the discovery stage. So my role really is just to honor anything people feel worth talking about, feel worth the entire apparatus of career public service to do, analysis and pros and cons and effectiveness or whatever around. So by lifting up those voices, we never lose anything because it's just more perspectives, and it is not taking anything away because it's not like a referenda that says the other half of the people for the next 4 years, have to live with another reality, right? So by working strictly in the discovery and define diamond, I think one can be at ease and pre-commit to whatever that comes from the process. It is, again, not replacing parliaments.
So key takeaways for me: be curious, be empathetic, and take both sides. These beautiful people are the reason I think that myself and Mark actually got into this space. It's really this line of thought. It's been an honor to have you. Thank you so much.
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper, everyone. Thank you. Please take a seat. We've got a few final announcements, and then we go back to the networking. And I think there's still pizzas and garlic bread out there. We might have over-ordered on that. So if you want to quadratic vote me down, please do so. Go ahead. And please take photos of them taking photos of them. Thank you. That's to the matter. But one of the key takeaways, I think, as well, is that there is hope, folks. There is hope for these ideas. There is hope for change and movement. So we really appreciate, all of you listening in on this. Chris, if we go to, actually, before we're already at the next slide. Thanks, Chris. Thinking ahead of me. Chris is my AI. Plurality.net, is it? So make sure, one key takeaway as well from this is head to plurality.net and make sure you say it right as well, unlike me. If you say it 10 times fast, you get a reward. But plurality.net, check that out. You can see that video. There's a whole lot of other content on there. Please definitely check that out. The next event for Aus DeFi is going to be on the 28th. Same space where we are right now. Arturo and I will be back from Canada and the USA. We should have some cool stories from that. What you can see on screen here is one of the sponsors. So Psych is an AI engine company Arturo and I built. It's what we're heading over to the States for. There's blockchain elements to this. I won't go into detail too much now, but just think that blockchain is all about security and transparency. AI needs that. So this is a tool that has capabilities like that in there. So it's all for workflows, but in terms of proving that certain things took place, I don't care that my doctor in the future is using AI. I just want to know that they've actually read over the outputs before they come out. Blockchain can help with that. ZK proofs will help with that because there's certain things you don't want to move around in terms of proving bits of the data. So more than you know it, folks, blockchain is very much needed by AI. If you are exactly, did someone say woo? Or was that? Okay, there you go. Thank you, sir. If you're interested in presenting, we do these monthly, okay? We typically do them at the end of the month in Sydney. There's events in Melbourne, Brisbane, and Perth as well. So if you are traveling, go ahead. If we go to the next slide, please, Chris. Aus DeFi Association. So this is the group that is the not-for-profit that has the relationship with Stone and Chalk. It's our second year now, and we really thank them for being a supporter of us. City of Sydney supported us. We've got some amazing sponsors in Cloud Tech, Block Earner, Stables have helped out as well, CoinStash, and many other international and national blockchain groups. So there's a lot of support for the community. You go to Melbourne, they've got great communities with Upside. You go to Brisbane, there's all things blockchain and others like Bitcoin Brisbane. You go to Perth, Aus DeFi is there as well. Even here in Sydney, there's a group that's been running since 2013 called Blockchain Sydney, and they do amazing stuff. If you're interested in community, another key takeaway from this, everyone that has come to our events has always walked away with something, and sometimes that is just a connection from someone new. So whether it's your first time or who knows, you could have heard Arturo one too many times and this is your last time, but walk away with a connection, folks. And let's go to the next one. I talk a lot, and so does Chris, who's behind the camera there. We do a weekly podcast called Digital Nexus Podcast. We're talking a lot about AI. We're definitely going to be talking about this because there's so much to unpack just from this conversation. The transcript, the reason why we record it, why there's an AI, is because for our previous Aus DeFi meetups, for the Digital Nexus podcast, for this event, it's really interesting when you take the transcript and you talk to it. You use the AI to be able to expand on ideas. For example, I might take this transcript and put in an idea that I've got for democracy for a Caribbean island somewhere, as Major has highlighted at the back, and see what this says, along with background from Audrey and Glen's talks. There could be really interesting stuff there. Technology is amazing. It's great at bringing us together, but as you guys, as Glen and Audrey, you mentioned before on stage here, that, and I think Glen, you especially said it, that there's more to big tech than people think. There's actually more to stuff under the hood. We demonize the other side. It's really easy to write people off. Internet was supposed to be about bringing us together as a communication platform. In some ways, it's divided us even more. AI has that potential to bring us together, but we're already seeing pockets of it dividing people. I think we need to think about not writing up each other off, but actually using technology to understand the other person, to find that commonality there. So with that, we're going to open up to networking. Next slide, Chris, just making sure I haven't skipped anything. Actually, let's go back one more because there's one right at the start that I forgot to go through, which is Stone and Chalk. So as mentioned, if you are interested in anything to do with here, the events, this co-working space, very happy to chat. Alex up the back, he's got his hand up. We'll breakdance for you if you sign up today. And are you going to do the bunny? Is it a bunny hop or a kangaroo? I can't remember. One of those. Anyway, thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it. Thank you.